I want to welcome everyone to the Iowa Central Railroad. I am your host, Doug Harding. This is a map of the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad. You can see, and I'm modeling from up here at Mason City all the way down through Marshalltown, Grinnell to Oskaloosa, and then on to Albia, where we connect with the CB&Q Railroad. That gives you an idea of what I'm modeling. You come into the stairway down to the basement, and you can see I've lined the walls with all kinds of important things. Some awards, plaques, etc. I've gotten. But this is based on the Minneapolis and St. Louis. The predecessor was the Iowa Central. We come on down the stairs, and the first thing you'll notice, there's a track that's coming out of the wall, actually the stairway here, and this is a nice long siding that comes in over the workbench. I like to call this track RIP. This is where I put cars I've been fixing or working on from the workbench up here, but we also are starting to call this Hampton because I have added a, you can see we put some crossovers in, and we now have a sugar beet loading facility at the location of Hampton, Iowa, which was, sugar beets were raised in that area way back when. Here you can see some sugar beet cars and loads waiting there. We got a passenger car that sits on the ground and it functions as a depot. We also got some loading facilities. We got some grain storage bins I've been working on to give you an idea. We're going to come around the corner here. So we curve around. You can see stuff gets stored up here that needs to be worked on. Of course, we have little projects like details. Outhouses are certainly one of the details. I modeled 1949. Outhouses were common back then. So I've got a variety of them here that need to be finished and painted or whatever and put on the layout. But I'll give you a little bit of this, just a pan of the workbench facility. You can see I have storage shelves and projects going on. Lots of tools laying around, and etc. So we're moving south on the railroad from the stairway. Of course, I said is Hampton. We come out of Hampton. We're coming into what is known as the town of Ackley, Iowa. And of course, at the north end of Ackley, I call this Al's used car lot. I've been working on vehicles this winter, trucks and things, and digging out stuff. And you can see I've just got a wide variety of things, some things I've acquired and things I've been building and working on. These right here are really neat little laser cut truck bodies for grain and livestock and etc. But we come back, and you can see on the backdrop there a picture of the Marshall canning factory that was at Ackley. And I've got a couple tracks in here you can see, so that we can move refrigerator cars and box cars in and out of the canning factory. They were a big sweet corn canning facility at that time. So, and you can see that my buildings sometimes are pretty rudimentary. There's just a piece of a blue insulation foam. I've taken a marker and marked some windows and doors on, but it will stand in until we do get a building built. So, of course, there are buildings and some scenes on the railroad. Here we got a little loading dock where we're unloading some crates and barrels. Looks like a combine's arrived in town to be unloaded, and a variety of other stuff, lots of detail parts. But we come down into Ackley proper. Of course, here we're busy unloading, got some new tractors coming into town, so that's always good to see. And a variety of tractors. As you can see, there's several different kinds. We got a couple on this flat car that I'm not sure of the exact heritage, but this is how they would be loaded on a flat car. I certainly need to get the proper blocking and tie downs there, but that'll happen someday. So I've got some grain elevators, got a nice little depot here. So apologize if the camera seems to be a little shaky. I'm hand holding this, so we'll see how this works for you. But now we're coming into one of my favorite scenes that I've been working on of late. This is a lumberyard scene that I've just finished up. Kit bashing a couple. Here is what I started with, is a simple little Atlas lumberyard kit, and I've taken a couple of them and put them together in what we call a kit bash. We've got some scenery going on here, and just got a building there. It's been added on for the handling all the hardware and the glass and screen wire and all that type of stuff, and delivery truck. And then part of the lumberyard company, of course, was a coal shed where coal would be delivered. Again, 1949, lots of coal. We got a coal pile there and a conveyor and a truck, and we got an oil jobber starting to come up together in the back corner there. Need to get some paint out and some details. In case you want to know here's what an old lumberyard looked like. That's what inspired me on this model. Now, Ackley is important on the railroad because we had an interchange with the Illinois Central. And you can see the crossing there. I haven't actually built the diamond itself, but it's got a tower and it looks like a crossing. And the Ackley Interchange was important because this is where all the Decker meat came down from Mason City to Ackley and was given to the Illinois Central here. And you can see the yard at the south end of town, where I've got some Decker meat reefers sitting here waiting to be picked up by the Illinois Central, or it could be that they are empties coming back to the Iowa Central, ready to go back up to Mason City to the Decker meat plant. So we'll see that in a minute. Of course, we're in a basement where I had a couple walls, and so we've had to cut some holes through the walls, and those will be patched when we moved out. But we're leaving Ackley here. Give you a pan back to the general room. You can see what's going on. We come through the wall, and we are just coming in some rural country scenes, starting to build up one of those grain bin, government storage bin locations. You can see, and I've got some farm implements. We got some livestock that needs to be unpacked and set out. And here we get cattle in the field, out in pasture, and got some calves in there. And then, oh, look at that, we cross over the stream bed. We got some milk cows heading back to the barn. It must be milking time, and they're heading in. So got some others sitting here waiting. Nice little farm scene that's starting to develop here. A corn crib barn. Got the farmhouse, and been making some trees. Looks like she's been out hanging the wash, so letting the laundry dry. But we're coming into the town of Eldora. Eldora is where there was a Chicago Northwestern line that went through on the north end of town, and at the north end was what they called the oil track. They had a bunch of oil jobbers in there, and I've got a tank car there and got a couple of small buildings there were like 4 or 5 oil jobbers all on that track in the truck. But we'll come back, and again you can see some trees. I've been playing with a static grass machine I made, and you can see the grass standing up hopefully. Working on that. Need to do more scenery work, but this gives you an idea of what's possible. But Eldora is another nice little town. A lot of switching, grain elevators. As you can see, we've got several grain elevators here. Various small depot, and of course they required stock pens. Just about every town in Iowa had stock pens if they were on a railroad, where livestock could be shipped into the meat packing companies in places like Chicago and Sioux City, etc. So, but yeah, here you can. Eldora it's not a large town, you know. Well, I say not a large town. I have a large layout. I'm in a basement that's 30 by 58, so this is a big layout by all respects. So Eldora would be a large town on most small layouts, but here I see it as a small town. We got some brick and tile work stuff, the lumberyard there. Oh, another bag of cattle waiting to be put up. But we've got another farm scene here. We've got a farmer out, hay bales in the field being collected, farmhouse and a barn, a nice looking silo there. You can, yeah, need to get some fencing put in, keep those critters in place. And of course, south of at Eldora, you had the Iowa River, so we've got the Iowa River starting to take place here with some trees and bushes and things like you would find along the riverside, and the trestle going across the river. I scratch built the trestle. We've got some trees and action in the background, and way up on the hill in the far distance, it looks like we've got some construction work going on. So we'll have to watch that and see what gets developed there. But we come out of Eldora and we follow around the curve here. A little bit more scenery. I've got a nice building here, and I like construction equipment, so I've collected a few dozers of various, and graders and other types of stuff that some of these are models I've built, others are things I've purchased. And even though it's on pink foam, it's a nice display place to show them off. From Eldora, we continue on around and we come into Marshalltown, Iowa. As you can see here, I'm going to see if I can zoom in on, yeah, there you can see a hole in the wall. That hole is where the Chicago Great Western and Chicago Northwestern, coming from Chicago, come into Marshalltown proper. Got some stock pens there. That building on the wall represents Lennox Industries, of manufacturers of furnaces. I'm going to zoom back out. So hold on, there we got a couple of our switch engines. We have, right here we have what I call the 8th Avenue Industrial Lead. This was on the east side of Marshalltown. Very active little spot that had a variety of businesses and industries. I've got Dunham and Bush, that was a foundry. We've got an auto dealership and scrap yard here, or auto repair shop I should say, and scrap dealer. Got a nice elevator scene here. You can see where we've done, again, we played with some static grass and ground foam scenery. We got a fellow in the doorway there, another one on the ground spotting the boxcar. Got some grain doors laying there waiting to be installed, and of course the ever-present dog that is watching everything. We'll come back out and you can see how that scene is developing. And there's their office building, a nice looking little structure. It makes a nice scene. This is the Koppel Grain Company, as you can see. That was a grain elevator that was in Marshalltown in that spot. We can come on down here, but the big important thing about this peninsula, or it's on a peninsula for me, but this 8th Street or 8th Avenue industry was the Swift meat packing plant. I don't have all my buildings built. I use cardboard boxes or pieces of foam, but that building there represents the Swift plant. And here would be the stock pens up at the north end of the Swift plant. We've got cattle and hogs, and this is on the corner. I'm going to back up. Here's a chair. Sometimes when I have little youngsters come, I let them play with this stock pens because they can stand up on this chair, get to it, and they love to play with the cattle and the hogs and stuff. So we just let them play there and have lots of fun. Doesn't hurt anything. But here you can get an idea. This is a nice little switching area. And of course some of my famous blue foam buildings and structures, the Swift plant. Of course we have an oil jobber in there. There was a concrete block works. We got some concrete block and piles of dunnage. And of course with Swift you also had Marshalltown Packing and Heilman Sausage were right there along the same tracks. So lots of meat activity there in that section of Marshalltown. Here we come back down. This is in the industry storage buildings, the grain elevator. Just some wonderful stuff here starting to develop. Now you'll see that I do like to put maps on what I call on the fascia that tells you what is here the name of the area and often the industries. This helps with the operators so they know what they're doing. You'll notice from time to time you'll see these yellow boxes and the car cards. There's a card for each freight car or passenger car on the railroad with instructions about where it's supposed to go, and oftentimes also tells you what it contains, if it's empty or if it's got meat going to the meat pack, to the grocery warehouse or things like that. That's so. And there's for the set out. Here's for some other stuff, and here's for the yard at Marshalltown. We'll just give you an idea of what Marshalltown yard looks like here. There's about 5 tracks in here. It's not a very big yard as far as the size of Marshalltown goes, but it works well for the railroad. And I do like steam engines, so we have some, and I like the CB&Q, so we have a lot of CB&Q on the railroad. That's the Burlington route for some people. This is actually a Minneapolis and St. Louis line. I just kept the older name, the Iowa Central, and use that. Model 1949, so we still got a lot of colorful refrigerator cars at work. We got cabooses, we got box cars. Got a nice depot there for Marshalltown. Here's some of the really colorful Minneapolis and St. Louis. Those are F units, and one of their bay window cabooses sitting there that I built from a kit. We have the icing platform here for icing up those refrigerator cars. Here's another one of those bay window cabooses. I have about a dozen of them on the railroad that I built. So stock cars, of course, very prominent on our railroad. It handles a lot of meat and meat traffic. Here we got a Hormel meat reefer. Here's one from the Raskin Packing Company in Sioux City. And of course, the Decker beet plant car. Decker is everywhere on this railroad. So here's my rendition of the yard office at Marshalltown. So kit badge that kit. So, but move right along the main line here. You may notice there's a track in the background. That track is on its way to Roland, Iowa, on the Story City branch, and we have a grain elevator back here. This is Clemens Grove, as it was known on the railroad, and so there's a spot there for a grain elevator. But we got some tracks, so we're going to bid farewell to Marshalltown. We're going to continue work. We're working our way south. Let the camera focus here for a moment. South of Marshalltown, there was a place where tracks crossed over tracks. That was the Milwaukee and the Minneapolis and St. Louis. And I didn't really want to build tracks underneath my bench work, so I put the Milwaukee on top instead of underneath. But it works, and we got an old Milwaukee steam engine up there to remind people that that's the Milwaukee tracks. Someday I should get a decal put on the bridge. But this is a place that was known as Ferguson, Iowa. There's a very large grain elevator now, and it's still very active. Of course, on my railroad, the Milwaukee is up above instead of down below. Someday the depot will be built, and there will be a stairway run from both one track down to the other, which is how it was handled then. You walked up and down the stairs. Of course, we got some horses here in the pasture. Always good to see livestock. And then you can see we got that same wall with 2 holes cut through it. So we come back here, we got some storage. Got some scenery materials stored there. One of the things with the railroad, you need a lot of trees, and I'm slowly getting the trees made. We'll come back into the room. I'll show you. I've been doing some work here. This is my scenery, my rolling cart with all my scenery materials. Got drawers full of ground foam and bottles full of stuff. But give you an idea of some of the trees and the bushes and things that I've been working on. So here's some just hold that up there, you can see that. That's just a matting of ground foam on some polyester fiber, similar to how I make the trees. And you can see my mess in the box where I've been doing this, and the jar and the hairspray. I use hairspray for making things sticky. So, but that's a little bit of some of the fun we have. So this was one evening's project, making a bunch of trees. They need to get planted now. but using all this type of material to do that. So, as I said, we come back out of the wall. Now we're coming into the town of Grinnell, Iowa. And this gives you a view of Grinnell. It stretches along here. It's about 20 feet long here in this basement. One of the features of Grinnell, Iowa was where the Rock Island crossed. And there was a unique depot there. I have another building in place at the moment. Someday we might get the depot itself built, but you can see the crossing there. We have a locomotive on loan from the Crandick at the moment, sitting in for the Rock Island, but that's all right. But you can see we've got some buildings and a street scene starting to shape up. Got a nice little speeder shed here that I built. This and got the scenery done in that one. We come south of the Rock Island. We come into the main area where the Minneapolis and St. Louis served Grinnell, and we had a coal dealer. And of course there was the Rock Island Interchange track. You can see the pickle car sitting there on the interchange track, and in between that there was a lumber yard. I stole the building there for when I was doing the kit bash. I need to get one built and put back in there, so we have a lumber yard. But we had some feed mills and grain elevators, some other nice buildings and structures, and of course the old depot became the freight house down at that end of town. So that's how that was used. And I see we have a passenger train in town. The M&St. L pretty much ran doodlebugs or gas electrics. Maybe they would tow a car or two, but this was their standard passenger train from 1935 on. So that's what I run. So we don't have fancy passenger trains on this road. We just have some small ones. But we do have some unique cars. I'm looking, I can see the rolling train up there in the background, and one of the unique cars in the rolling train, you see we have a chapel car, the steeple there that folds up. And then on the end we have a combine, what we call a combo or combination car. It's part baggage and part passenger. And instead of a caboose, they use a combine. That way passengers could be handled, but and in the freight train. So, but here we got another set of those colorful Minneapolis and St. Louis F units. These are some F3s. The ones we saw earlier were the F7s, but here's Grinnell. And of course, it wouldn't be a town on this railroad without a stock pen and some stock cars, oil jobbers, etc. So here's Grinnell Canning, another canning factory on the railroad. They also canned a lot of sweet corn, pumpkin, that type of stuff. So in the background, that is another Marshall canning factory. That's in the one in Roland. The photo is actually a photo of a model built by my friend Clark Probst, and I just printed out the photo and pasted up on the back wall, and it looks pretty good there. And Clark did a great job of building that model on the one photograph that exists. So, but we do thank Clark for his sharing. And we see up at Roland there was a grain elevator and other businesses and industries. So it makes a nice little switching area, keeps somebody busy when they get that job. So we coming out of Grinnell here. We're coming through a cut in the terrain. We get a bridge. Again, scenery, a lot of static grass and some trees being built. But while I'm here, I'm going to go pause and show you my control system. I use a DCC system. This is Easy DCC, and each locomotive has its own little computer chip in it, and then this is a larger computer system, and I can control any number of locomotives with a variety of throttles. We use radio throttles here, or we use our smartphones. To give you a little bit better idea of some of the electronics involved, here is all the electronic boards. These were kits when I started, and soldered those all together myself, and of course all the related wiring and things. And then I have a test track and a programming track here. And we are also starting to use a Raspberry Pi. That's this little black box here. And that connects to my system, and that functions as a computer that lets the smartphone. That's a Wi-Fi apparatus that allows us to connect the smartphone to the system here. So you can run a train using your smartphone on my railroad. I mentioned the radio throttles. There are the control boxes for the radio signal. And we're going to continue on around here. It gives you, here's a nice overhead view of the bridge. Got a couple of teams of horses and wagons there. It gives you a feel and a flavor. Here you can see what's nice about the static grass, how that stands up and really looks like grass. Really makes for a nice scene. Coming around, and of course we have another wall. A hole right next to the doorway. So we come through, we're leaving Grinnell, and we're coming into what is Oskaloosa, but as we come around the corner, we come to a spot out in the country where we find the National Coal Company coal washer. This was built west of Oskaloosa, about 6-7 miles on the Minneapolis and St. Louis track, and for about 20-some years they hauled coal in there and cleaned it, and then most of it was actually shipped to Des Moines. But this is a pretty close rendition of what was there. We have one photo that we found, so I've tried to duplicate it as best I can. We've got some scenery going in place. Got a stream bed here, and one feature I really like is, see that pipe coming out with the stream of water coming down, dumping into, we got some dead weeds and grass there where whatever's coming out of that pipe is killing stuff off into the stream. So just spent a little time playing with some scenery there. I really like how that came out and looks good. But we come on this, as I said, this was on a line that was about 5 miles west of Oskaloosa, but it much closer in Oskaloosa on my railroad. We have a small yard here as we come into the north end of town. At the north end of the town was also where they had built the larger stock pens in later years. So we have a track there with a lot of stock cars on it. And of course the grain elevator again. We come into town proper. I haven't done a lot of work down here with buildings and such yet, but we'll get that. We got another little coal dealer here. Marshalltown and Oskaloosa were home of Western Grocer, which was a huge grocery distribution facilities, and they own Marshall Canning, they own a vinegar works, they own pickle factories, etc. But this was they had a large warehouse in Oskaloosa that still stands. You can still see the Western Grocer sign on the side of the building. So that's an important industry down here. But we also have a lot of other things going on. Building. One of the things that I've also through the years, I've collected a few military related vehicles, and Oskaloosa was home of a National Guard unit. So we have the National Guard here on, they got their depot and their facilities on it. It's just a fun place to park some of those vehicles. They also make nice loads on flat cars. We continue, we're still in Oskaloosa. We come down to the south end of Oskaloosa. There was a company called Severe Manufacturing. They made bridge components and bridges. So I recently acquired a bunch of extra bridges that I don't know what I'm going to do with. Someone gave them to me, so they're right now, they are standing in for the building and the industry. Of course, there was a lot of coal loading down in Oskaloosa. That was big coal country and some other stuff. But here it gives you an eye back towards Oskaloosa. We'll get out of the light a little bit so you can see what's happening up there. But we come out of Oskaloosa. We head Oskaloosa, where the Iowa Central turned east to go to Peoria, Illinois, and then also ran south to Albi, Iowa. And so here, this switch you can see where the tracks are separating, and the one in the back, that is going to Peoria. And here in front, we are coming down out of Oskaloosa, and we're coming into the little town of Eddyville. And we are talking little town. We had a place along the river to load sand and gravel. I put an oil jobber in there. There's a very small depot and a very small grain elevator, and of course the stock pens. And this is, as I said, this is a very small town. This siding is only about 4 feet long. You can only get about 6 cars on there, but it's a small town. But Again, we got a map on the fascias to help with the guys operating. We got the boxes for setting out the car cards, etc. And we even have a listing of all the towns on the railroad, so you kind of know where you are and which direction you need to go. And then just a nice little scene here. I've got, I've got the outhouse here and the depot. The agent has even used some cinders to put a path to the outhouse so he doesn't have to walk in the mud when he needs to go. So we need to do some work on the backdrop there, but it's coming along. Now, of course, at Eddyville, that's where the Des Moines River was located at. Eddyville got flooded out many times, but I'm deep in the river here. We got the bridge in the background is going to Peoria. The bridge in the foreground is on its way to Albia. So, now, Eddyville was also, I lived there for a short while. It was hit by a tornado this month that we moved in. So I found a picture on the internet, printed it out, and got it taped up on the backdrop. I need to do some more painting and get some more clouds painted in here, but that always catches people's eye when they see that tornado, and they wonder about that. Of course, across the river at Eddyville was a place called Bridgeport. Bridgeport was the site of a electric power generating plant. And so we have coal being delivered to the power generating plant. And that's a building that someone gave me recently. I've cut it apart, but it's going to get changed into the power plant at some point. So yes, here's Bridgeport. Now, of course, off in the distance, I mentioned coal, southern Iowa, a lot of coal. So we got another coal loading spur there. Some cars getting loaded with coal. We come around the tracks, we come into what's known as Maxon, Iowa. This is where the Minneapolis and St. Louis and the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy crossed each other as they both came into Albia. The CB&Q being an east-west railroad, the M and St. L being a north-south railroad. And so we have a small yard here. It's full of cars. That represents the CB&Q at Albia. And we shove cars in there and pull them up. You can see it says CB&Q Albia Interchange or drop off. And then here in front we've got the track, the M and St. L or Iowa Central tracks coming into Albia itself. We got one of their cupola cabooses and a couple of flat cars and others, and we come into Albia proper. So here was a fun little project I worked on about a month or so ago. I acquired this crane. It was set up for being in action digging, and I thought it'd be better folded up and on a low flat car, so I cut some parts off, would use some wire to make hinges, and it can move that boom, but it really looks good just folded up like that. So, and of course the depot there, and here is another one of those M and St. This is an M and St. L RS1, an Alco road switcher. The M and St. L owned 35 of them. They had the largest fleet in the country, and they had 9 different paint schemes, which is rather unusual for a railroad. Most railroads just had 1 or 2 paint schemes. But the M and St. L, they were coming out of receivership, and so the story is that every time they ordered new locomotives, they painted them a different color to just tell the shippers that they were a growing and going concern, that they were doing well. So that Albia is not a large town, but you can see we got a lot of freight traffic happening here. There's some stock pens, a grain elevator up there by the water tower, and we come down this end, and we got a big building here of some sort for shipping out stuff. So that gives you an idea. Now you notice we have obstacles in the basement, water heater and furnace, so we have to go around them. And you see the track coming there around the furnace, and this is just coming into what is known as a staging yard. This is 10 tracks full of trains, represents St. Louis, the south end of the railroad, but it's like being in a theater. You have the actors on stage, and then you have those actors waiting off stage for their cue to come on stage, and that's what these trains are waiting for, their cue, their instructions to come on to the railroad. And you can see we got an M and St. L RS1, we got a CB&Q steam engine, we got some CB&Q diesels, F units here, So we got a lot of trains. There's some more empty decker reefers heading back. We'll be heading back up to Mason City. We get some extra cabooses here and a work train. So there's actually a lot of activity taking place here. So we'll just slowly walk by and get an idea of some of the types of cars and trains that are in this staging yard. Of course, we do have a lot of Minneapolis and St. Louis freight cars, that box car right there. So there you can see there's all the tracks and all the train packets with all the car cards for each train, plus there's a card for each locomotive. That tells you the number that you have to dial up on your throttle so you can run a train. So now we're going to go past. Here's my storage for magazines. I've collected a lot of magazines through the year, a lot of good information in those. And we're going to, we were at the south end of the railroad there. I'm going to diverge here for a moment. This is when we operate. We have a group come down, and it's like playing a game. And you have instructions. We have a dispatcher. Here's the dispatcher panel to give you a close look at that. It's kind of a map of the railroad drawn out as a line art drawing. There are magnets on there. Each train is marked with a magnet, and you can move the magnet from place to place so you know where every train is located at. And of course, to go with that map, you have a timetable so that the dispatcher and engineers know what time they're supposed to be where, or that's the train schedule. Then we have a train sheet where we record what's happening. Then we have paperwork for the crews. This is a switch list so they can write down all the cars in their train, where they're supposed to go, and then when they pick up cars, they'll add them to the list so they have a record. It's easier than trying to memorize in your head. So anyway, we're going to come back around here. We're going to, on the back side of the stairway here, you can see where the tracks come through. I cut a hole in the stairway, and you can see the blue taped block. When I move, that block will fit back into the hole, a little cock, and you won't even know the hole was there. So, but we got the tracks coming along. This is some very lightweight temporary track. My construction technique's a little different from what other people do. This is just 2-inch foam mounted on some shelf brackets. There's nothing else supporting, just the foam, the tracks on the foam. But it works well for this lightweight temporary. I may never use this stretch of track again in the next house, but possibly I will. And here we're coming into, I've got some scenery stuff here. This is things you'd use to paint backdrop materials. I'm going to set those aside for the moment. You can also see I have this is actually a window shade. I painted it blue, and when I'm taking pictures of models, I can sit there and I've got a nice blue backdrop and a place to take pictures of models. But what we're coming into is, this is the north end of the railroad. This is Mason City, Iowa. This is a major spot because this is where the Decker meatpacking plant is. But the south end of Mason City, they had a bunch of brick and tile work areas there that were served by, there were 5 different railroads in Mason City, and the brick and tile were served by some of the other railroads, but they had brick kilns and piles of clay tile and brick and stuff. We also had grain elevators there, silos. We had a scale house. This is where all the meat coming out of the meatpacking plant had to come down here, and the cars had to be weighed if it was hanging meat so they would know how much to charge for freight. But again, we've got a yard here. We've got the boxes for keeping track of all the car cards. You can see I've used some siding J channels here, and these are some engines that are stored at Mason City, and you can see the car card. The J panel just really makes it great for holding those cards. But you can see we've got strings of cars here. I've got the upper side is cleaned off at the moment because I was just getting ready to maybe paint some clouds. And let me show you how these stencils work. I got some things laid out here. Do this holding the camera. But here you can see this is a stencil for a cloud, and you would hold that up there and spray paint and just give a light misting of a white spray paint on that blue background, and suddenly you have clouds. And so, and then you move the stencil around. You can turn it upside down. You can flip it over and do the back side, just to make an easy way to paint some clouds. So that's why that stuff is all cleared off up there. But we continue on to Mason City. We come down here at the north end, and we come into the Decker meatpacking plant. This is something that I'm famous for, because I did a lot of research and wrote some articles about 15 years ago now, a long time ago, about this meatpacking plant in the industry and how you would build one on your model railroad and how you would operate the railroad through here. And so the white building here, this is what's called the Hog Warehouse. This was a 5-story building where they would keep hogs on hand so they could have several days production in case the supply of hogs coming in was stopped by something like a blizzard in the winter months especially. But they would receive them, unload them here at these sheds here, and then they would bring them into the Hog Warehouse, and the Hog Warehouse or hotel had a ramp at one end, kind of like a football stadium, and they could walk the hogs up the ramp to whatever level they had a place to store them. And then when it was time to take them to the slaughterhouse, they went across on this overhead walkway into the slaughterhouse, where they would become the lovely hams and pork chops that we all seem to enjoy. But this is my model of the Decker meatpacking plant. What you see laying here, this is supposed to be the overhead apparatus for icing the cars and moving blocks of ice and things, but in a previous move it got damaged, and I just never got it rebuilt, put back up in place. I had it out the other day to show somebody, but you can see they had a nice frame structure to hold these rods that they had a rail for moving blocks of ice, etc. So, and of course, the meatpacking plant, you got carloads of coal for the power plant. They used a lot of steam power and steam for things. We also have a loading dock here. This is where all the byproducts that came out of the packing plant were loaded. Where I'm standing in the aisle was a building for the byproducts. Byproducts building was here, and then we had the ice house for the storage of ice, and then we had the power plant building all sat on this side of the tracks. So I mentioned this is the Hog Warehouse down this way, but at this end we have another ramp. This is where the cattle came in. They slaughtered hogs, cattle, and sheep at this plant in the time period I model, and the cattle came in at the north end. So there were more stock pens and a ramp that came up into the newer part of the building, which was built when they started slaughtering beef. So, and this is, yeah, I'm well known for this, and I know a lot about it. Now, of course, the other thing up here at the north end, we have a little 3-track yard. There were a sugar beet plant and 2 cement plants in Mason City as well. And there was a small yard up there that the Minneapolis and St. Louis used to shove in sugar beets and cars to be loaded with cement, that type of thing. So, and then in the background, you can see there are 2 levels of tracks, one lower and one above. Those are again staging tracks. And so I have staging the north end of the railroad and the south end of the railroad. So here we just give you an idea of Mason City proper is a pretty large railroad. You know, again, this is a large railroad. The Decker meatpacking plant is larger than what you would see on most model railroads, but it works well here for me. So, of course, this is, as you can see, this is the north end of the railroad. It ends right here. Comes right out to the end of the track. So, but just to we'll pan back and give you a view. There is the St. Louis staging and the furnace that sits here. And each time I've moved, I've had to modify things depending on what size the basement was and where the furnace was located and things. And right after I moved in, we had to replace the water heater. And they told me the new water heater was bigger. And I said, oh no, I just put the benchwork up, and that's how much clearance we had. Less than ½ an inch after they put the guys installing it were intrigued. One of them built model cars, and the other one had built race cars at one time. So they loved seeing the trains down here, and they were so happy that the water heater fit. I was too. So, but anyway, we're coming back here. We got the north end of Mason City we come into now. This is my where I do painting. You can see I'm sloppy at times, and I got a clean out sink here. I use water-based paints. And you can see I've got a table for staging and keeping all my paint supplies and stuff. But what I wanted to show you down here, we've got more staging tracks. I'm going to look there. You can see that hole coming through the wall. I mentioned the Chicago Great Western, Chicago Northwestern. And you can see we've got, well, here's a Chicago Northwestern engine sitting there. So you can see that we do use these tracks. And then, oh, back here, look at that. We have a Chicago Great Western caboose that I built, and here's a Chicago and Northwestern caboose. So that's what these tracks up here, these represent Chicago. They go in and out of that hole in the wall to Marshalltown. Now you notice there's a lower track here. This is Peoria, the far east end of the railroad, and we do have a big passenger train here, mostly mail train. And we've got another freight train, and we got another short freight train up here in front, and they come around this curve here, and they come underneath, coming down from Oskaloosa, this track that comes underneath what is Albia and Maxon. So here's a close-up of, this is the tail end. We have a Y here. You've heard of doing a three-way turn on a road or something. That's what's called a Y. You could turn engines, you could turn whole trains if you had a Y. And we come into, you can see the yard throat here is that one track spreads out into 6. And then you can see the Peoria on the lower level, Chicago on the upper level. Now I'm going to spin around here. So here we're getting into Albia, the CB&Q end of Albia, and we do have a turntable here with some passenger cars sitting on it. And you can see where I've laid out tracks for a roundhouse. I've got a roundhouse building that someone recently gave me, but it's not the same size. It won't fit, so we'll have to do something. Some projects are kind of on hold, as I know I'm going to be moving in a year. But this gives you, here's a steam engine that I kit bashed a number of years ago, and some other older steam engines there. Here you can see the stock pens at Albia, and of course the grain elevator. Just all kinds of good stuff. But there you can see that tornado on the far wall over at Eddyville. See Eddyville in the distance. I'll be up close, and you can just see all the railroad here. So, well, that's my tour of the Iowa Central. I hope you enjoyed it, and you have a good day. Goodbye.